and I will thank Shahab on our staff today is driving our slides. Before we begin, I want to note that Hmong translation services are available today for today's meeting. Everyone that's joining us on the Zoom should have English set as the default, but for those without access to the Zoom requiring translation services, a conference phone line is available that provides translation of today's meeting into Hmong. The conference line number is 888-273-3658. That's 888-273-3658. And the participant code for the conference line is 300828. Again, the conference participation code is 300828. All questions and comments today will be translated to English and Hmong, and because of this, we may have periodic pauses to make sure the translators have time and for us to receive translated comments and questions. If at any point you need technical support, please let us know using the Zoom chat feature so we can assist you. Next slide, Shahab. Before we begin, a couple of logistics. The meeting today is being recorded. For Zoom participants, please make sure your screen name reflects your actual name and affiliation. Today's participants are automatically muted as they join and will be asked to unmute themselves during the questions or comment period. Today's Zoom chat will be monitored by staff for questions. That chat will go to division staff and won't be visible to the general audience. As we receive questions, similar questions may be combined. If you don't have access to the Zoom chat or you have questions later, you may email your comments to scottchastadrout@waterboards.ca.gov. If you are on the Hmong translation phone line, please let the translator know that you have a question or comment, and they will take the translation for us. Shahab, next slide. To get started, I wanted to go over a few ground rules for this meeting. First, this is a public discussion and we are here to listen and to respect the perspectives and ideas shared. We recognize how deeply personal and emotional these subjects can be, and we ask everyone to remain respectful. Second, we ask that everyone listen with an open mind to better understand other perspectives. We can all respect another person's point of view without necessarily agreeing with them. Today is a public discussion, and this meeting is not intended to be a debate. Rather, today's purpose is to share information on the preliminary draft regulation and hear and respect perspectives and ideas being shared, not to win a debate. Third, we ask that you please stay on point and on time when asking questions or providing comments. We want to give everyone an opportunity to speak today, so please keep your comments brief and to the point. We plan to provide each commenter with 3 minutes initially. If a commenter would like additional time, you can raise your hand again and we will call on you at the end of the comment period once everyone has had their first chance to provide comment. We do encourage specific comments that will help inform the regulation we're planning to bring to the board for consideration later this month, or sorry, I should say in December. Next slide. This slide provides a brief overview of how you can provide questions today. If able, we're preferring that you use the Zoom chat feature to provide your questions. These questions again will be compiled and staff will respond to questions following my presentation. If you're unable to use the Zoom chat because you're participating in the meeting through the audio portion of your phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself when asked to do so. Additionally, anyone is able to email questions to scottchastadrout@waterboards.ca.gov, or if you're on the translation conference phone line, you can notify the translator. Next slide. The rough outline for today's meeting is as follows. We will start with a background of the drought proclamation and state water boards authorities. Next, I'll provide an overview of the proposed preliminary updates to the previous emergency regulation, with a brief overview of previous provisions of the regulation that staff have not proposed significant changes to. Following the presentation, we'll have an opportunity for questions on the proposed updates and then public comment. Next slide. The background on the drought proclamations. As most of you are likely aware, on May 10th, 2021, Governor Newsom declared a drought emergency for 41 counties, including Siskiyou County. The drought emergency proclamation directed the State Water Board and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to take several actions that resulted in adoption of emergency regulations for the Scott and Shasta watersheds between 2021 and 2023. During the 2022 and 2023 water year, which went from October 1st, 2022 through September 30th, 2023, the Klamath River watershed received above average precipitation, but less precipitation than in other parts of California. On March 24th, 2023, Governor Newsom signed Executive Order N-523, which removed drought provisions in portions of California. The Klamath River watershed was not included and remains subject to the 2021 drought proclamation and emergency provisions. In addition to the emergency authorities, the State Water Board also has other relevant authorities noted here. The State Water Board may take enforcement action to prevent unauthorized diversions of water or violations of terms and conditions of water right permits and licenses. The board may initiate administrative proceedings to prevent waste or unreasonable use of water. The Water Code also establishes a human right to water, to sufficient affordable water to meet basic needs for human consumption and sanitation. And the Penal Code includes provisions that livestock owners must provide sufficient water for their animals. Here is a timeline of past drought emergency regulations in the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds. The drought regulation was adopted on August 17th, 2021, and went into effect on August 30th of that year. Note that the board's emergency regulations are in place for 1 year once in effect, unless otherwise withdrawn by board action. Before that regulation expired, a revised emergency regulation was readopted by the board on June 29th, 2022, and went into effect on July 29th of that year. The regulation was not readopted and then expired on July 31st, 2023. On May 29th, 2023, the State Water Board received a petition for rulemaking to set minimum in-stream flows in the Scott River from the Karuk tribe and other parties. The board held a hearing on that petition, which was expanded to include the Shasta River watershed, on August 15th, 2023. At the end of that hearing, the board directed staff in part to move forward with an emergency regulation for the Scott River and Shasta River watersheds. The preliminary draft regulation is part of that effort to bring an emergency regulation before the board for consideration in December. Next slide. For this meeting, we want to focus on the proposed changes to the prior emergency regulations. The bolded items on this and the next slide indicate some of those proposed changes. But before we dive into those changes, we want to provide a brief overview of portions of the regulation that don't have substantial changes proposed. These are the non-bolded sections you see on the next two slides. Following that, we will cover each of the bolded sections in more detail. The broad structure of the regulation remains the same. The flow numbers remain the same and may be updated still upon a recommendation from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and in coordination with the National Marine Fisheries Service. The board can issue curtailment orders to protect those flows, and these are issued in order of water right priority, integrating surface and groundwater uses. Diverters must certify compliance or provide a reason why their diversion can continue. For example, the water is non-consumptive, it is for human health and safety needs, or it is for minimum livestock needs. There is a process to petition for higher than minimum amounts of water for health and safety or minimum livestock needs. There is also a process called local cooperative solutions that allow users to come up with alternatives to curtailment and water rights priority. Additionally, the regulation allows for information orders to solicit information on water diversions and for curtailment orders to protect senior water users throughout the Klamath Watershed. Finally, it prohibits certain inefficient livestock diversions at certain times of year, generally outside the irrigation season. Section 875.1 provides an exception to curtailment for non-consumptive uses, such as direct surface water diversions for hydropower, or dedications for in-stream fish and wildlife benefits, or other diversions that are demonstrated to not be consumptive and do not decrease downstream flows. A diverter seeking to continue to divert under this section must submit a certification to the Deputy Director. Staff are proposing no changes to the non-consumptive uses section of the regulation. Section 875.3 provides an exception to curtailment for minimal livestock watering, and no changes regarding this section are proposed. Section 875.4 provides authority for broader water curtailments across the California portion of the Klamath River watershed to protect senior water right users. And under the expired regulation, the division had not taken action under this section. And again, no changes are proposed to this section of the previous regulation. Next slide, Shahab. Section 875.5 establishes categories or groupings of water right holders in order of priority for curtailment in the Scott and Shasta River watersheds and reflect the different adjudications. Curtailments would be issued in priority using these groupings, and no fundamental changes to this section are proposed. Section 875.6 establishes reporting requirements for anyone issued a curtailment order, including certain certifications upon issuance of an order, reporting requirements to anyone continuing to divert water for use under an exception, and staff are not proposing substantive changes to this section. Section 875.8 establishes the methodology and requirements for information orders. Again, staff are not proposing changes to this section. And finally, Section 875.9 provides for penalties for failure to comply, where staff again are not proposing substantive changes to this section. So now on to those proposed preliminary changes to the emergency regulations. Items of proposed changes include to groundwater local cooperative solutions, clarification of Scott River flow requirements, updates to the inefficient livestock watering prohibition, and additions to the minimum human health and safety exception. We'll start first with groundwater local cooperative solutions. The Groundwater Local Cooperative Solution Program, offered in 2022 to 2023, required a 30% reduction in pumping by overlying groundwater users throughout the Scott River Valley irrigation season. This LCS had a very high participation in the Scott River watershed, and water users exercised significant creativity in finding ways to reduce pumping while pursuing their farming and ranching businesses. However, the program has received significant critiques, including that the baseline and reductions in use are difficult to verify and varied widely, that compliance was inadequately monitored, that the local cooperative solutions effectively penalized those that had already adopted highly efficient irrigation practices, and that the program did not result in a 30% reduction in consumptive use. The preliminary draft regulation presents modifications to address some of the critiques of the previous groundwater local cooperative solution option. These proposed changes would apply to all overlying groundwater local cooperative solutions, including new options presented in the future slides that we'll show. These changes include a submission deadline of April 15th, which is intended to be late enough that farmers can assess the water year type, yet early enough to help ensure clear review and implementation timelines. It includes metering of all groundwater wells covered by the LCS, the local cooperative solution, with offsets if this is not feasible, to ensure that groundwater use is readily available. It includes an agreement to allow compliance inspections with 24-hour notice to reduce at least one barrier to oversight of plans. And it includes posting of pending local cooperative solutions online for 1 week prior to a decision to better provide for public feedback on those plans. Next slide. Let's see. Great. Check one more, Shahab, I think. sorry, you were right. Go back one. Thank you. The preliminary draft emergency regulation includes 3 potential groundwater local cooperative solution options on which staff are today soliciting feedback. These options are listed here and will be discussed further in the coming slides. The options include the percent-based pumping reduction option from the previous emergency regulation with some updates, a graduated groundwater cessation option, and a best management practices option. Go ahead, Chad. So option A, LCS percent-based reduction in pumping. The Groundwater Local Cooperative Solution Program offered in 2022 and 2023 is referred to here as the percent-based reduction in pumping option. In addition to the benefits noted above, this option has the advantage of being familiar to the community, which could be particularly helpful for implementation on a short-term emergency basis. The preliminary draft regulation presents an additional modification to this option in addition to those discussed previously, to address potential for overestimation of baseline water use that could undermine the impact of the reductions. The option here has been updated to establish a maximum baseline water use amount as defined in Appendix 5.d of the Siskiyou County Agricultural Economics Analysis in the county's groundwater sustainability plans. This analysis presents applied water requirements for crop based on specific estimates at the valley scale for use in the integrated valley models, Scott Valley Integrated Hydrologic Model and the Shasta Valley Integrated Hydrologic Model. When a landowner develops a percent-based reduction local cooperative solution plan, the plan's water use reduction baseline will be the lesser of their baseline water year use or the per acre amounts provided in Appendix 5.d. The first new proposed type of groundwater local cooperative solutions is a graduated overlying groundwater diversion cessation plan. Cessation of groundwater pumping provides for an easier evaluation and implementation process, and was one of the measures that analysis has shown to provide the largest reduction in consumptive use. Evidence presented to staff suggests that the date that groundwater pumping is ceased in the Scott River watershed is strongly correlated to the river's ability to meet flow requirements in the fall months. There are 2 proposed options for this program, with different diversion cessation schedules. In option 1, shown here, irrigation on 15% of acreage must cease by July 15th. Irrigation at 50% of the acreage must cease by August 15th. And irrigation on 90% of the acreage must cease by September 5th. For the remainder of the season, a maximum of 8 inches of water could be applied to the remaining 10% of acreage. This option and option C, best management practices, were concepts submitted by the Farm Bureau, and staff are soliciting more information on potential impacts of this proposal, as well as input from all parties in these options. You have option 2 there, Shahab. The second option for the graduated overlying groundwater diversion cessation, LCS, local cooperative solution, slightly increases the percentage of acreage when irrigation must cease, but it pushes out each cessation deadline 5 days. So in option 2, irrigation on 20% of the acreage must cease by July 20th. Irrigation at 50% of the acreage must cease by August 20th. And irrigation on 95% of acreage must cease by September 5th. For the remainder of the season, a maximum of 6 inches of water can be applied to the remaining 5% of acres. And then finally, the best management practices LCS, or local cooperative solution. This new proposed type of groundwater local cooperative solution is called a best management practices LCS. This is designed to be very straightforward and easier for a coordinating entity to verify, while also providing a path for those who have invested highly in their efficient irrigation systems. This option focuses on activities that are successful at reducing consumptive use, evaporative and transport losses. The best management practices include sole use of the low energy precision application pivot irrigation system, referred to as LIPA, with no irrigation of the pivot field corners The use of soil moisture sensors must be in place and used to inform irrigation timing. Also, this option requires early ending of irrigation in the driest years based on snowpack. If snowpack on April 1st is 80% of average or less, then 90% of the irrigated acreage must cease by August 31st, with limits on that last 10%. Next. The next topic we've updated, the Scott River flows. Staff are proposing additional language for the Scott River flow requirements to clarify that when hydrologic conditions are inadequate to support the minimum flows, the available natural flow still provides ecological benefit and must be protected at the highest level possible. Substituting a natural flow requirement in hydrologically variable stream systems is routine for bypass or flow release requirements. Next slide, Shahab. Proposed changes to the human health and safety provisions would allow a government entity or nonprofit organization the ability to file a certificate or petition for minimum human health and safety needs for communities without service from a public water system. In implementing previous iterations of the emergency regulation, requiring the seller of water to certify end uses proved to be a barrier to effectively providing for human health and safety, while also limiting diversions for other commercial uses. Applicable provisions of the human health and safety that were incorporated by reference into the Scott-Shasta regulation have been imported directly into the preliminary draft regulation. This language is consistent with the State Water Board's recent curtailment-related emergency regulation efforts in the Klamath River, Russian River, and Bay Delta, and other watersheds. The process for certifications and petitions for minimum human health and safety stays the same, except for as noted here above. Now our changes regarding the inefficient livestock watering prohibition. There are two updates to section 875.7, which generally prohibits inefficient livestock watering during the non-irrigation months. The revisions would allow diversions to occur during the prohibition period if all of a series of specific criteria are met. These options are provided based on experience gained during implementation on the last round of the emergency regulation and in response to requests for clearer parameters for livestock watering local cooperative solutions. The revisions would also allow for more frequent use of ditches to increase groundwater infiltration, avoid ditch damage, and reduce water needs to re-wet the ditches at the start of the irrigation season. The first change is for high flow conditions, and it's broadly consistent with conditions that occurred in both watersheds in January 2023. The new language provides proposed conditions for this version of the regulation. Under the defined high flow conditions, the diverters may divert using inefficient ditches under the conditions listed on this slide, which includes a finding that the peak coho salmon migration season has concluded, that the diversion is less than 20% of the stream flow at the point of diversion, the diversion avoids disturbing reds, and that a pulse flow has already occurred. Diverters must notify the State Water Board and maintain their diversion records. Next slide, Shahab. Another update to section 875.7 is that the inefficient livestock watering may now be included in tributary-wide local cooperative solutions if a series of conditions and requirements protective of flow and habitat are met. This option is not limited to high flow times, but it is limited to a collective 10% of the reach's flow. This option is in addition to, and not instead of, the previous option allowing for users on a tributary to include use of less efficient livestock watering methods based on an individualized finding from the Department of Fish and Wildlife that the use will adequately protect fishery resources. Go on to the next slide, Shahab. And now for a brief look at where we go from here. The next steps include issuance of a notice of proposed rulemaking that will include a finding of emergency, the draft regulation text, a digest that supports the regulation, and fiscal analysis. Additionally, the board will issue an agenda that includes consideration of the regulation at least 10 days in advance of the meeting where they will consider adoption. At the board meeting, Staff will present the regulation and there will be an opportunity for public comment. Please note that the board meetings may be attended in person or virtually. If the board adopts the regulation, it will be provided to the Office of Administrative Law for review. After receipt, the Office of Administrative Law has up to 10 days to complete its review. If approved, the regulation becomes effective on the date of it was approved by the Office of Administrative Law and is in place for 1 year. Next slide. Here you can see on this slide several web pages containing a list of how to stay informed. This includes links to the Scott Shasta Drought Response webpage and the Groundwater Storage Permitting webpage. There's also a link here to sign up to receive emails on the topic related to this regulation and our email address if you have questions or want to submit additional comments or information. As we complete our slides here, we'll review our ground rules one last time. Again, I ask you, Shahab, next slide, please. As we're speaking, please respect each other, listen actively and with an open mind, and be concise in your questions and comments. Next slide, and we'll repeat this one again, I believe. Again, if you joined us late, this is an opportunity today now for questions on today's presentation or other aspects of the proposed regulation. We ask that you please put your question in the Zoom chat. If you do not have access to the Zoom chat, you can raise your hand via the phone using *9 and then *6 to unmute once asked to do so. If you are participating via the translation conference line, please inform the translator if you have a question and they will receive that translation for us. And at this point, I will ask staff on the line to, we can take questions.
I'll go with the first question that I see here. I'm going to summarize the question. It says, explain how section 875.4 could affect holders of water rights on the Scott and Shasta River. And related, would a Klamath curtailment be in addition to the structure in the EREG, emergency regulation? So I want to note that 875.4 is the section that's entitled emergency curtailments due to lack of water availability in the Klamath River watershed. And I want to note that this mirrors the type of curtailments that were used to protect senior water rights holders that were adopted in the Delta and the Russian River in other drought emergency regulations. It has not been used in the prior drought, and it's not anticipated to impact the Scott and the Shasta, as the curtailments there are provided for as part of the broader emergency regulation. It is available to provide protection in other areas that may be flow limited. And then I'll go on to another question that we received, which is the Water Board's authority to curtail unadjudicated overlying groundwater right diversions based on the reasonable use doctrine of the California Constitution? And yes, it is based upon that authority, along with the other authorities that were discussed in the presentation earlier. And then we have a question about, do we have a targeted timeline or date for presentation to the board of a decision? So staff plan to present this, not this, what we're discussing today, but an updated version of the draft regulation to the board for adoption in December. We're anticipating that will go to the second December board meeting, which is scheduled for December 19th and 20th. Sorry, there's a lot coming in, so. There was another question about whether for the local cooperative solutions, you could only enroll a subset of your land as part of the local cooperative solution. So the example would be if you had irrigated lands where some of your systems were part of the LIPA, were LIPA qualified and met the BMP local cooperative solution, the best management practice, local cooperative solutions, but maybe some of your lands didn't. And the response there is that, yes, you can enroll only a subset of the irrigated lands in the groundwater local cooperative solution. Your proposal should identify which parcels you're enrolling in as part of that proposal. And then there's a question, I'm not sure exactly which section it is. It looks like it's from page 7 and 7 of the preliminary draft that was issued, where it talks about section B1, and it was asking for clarification on the pro rata share provision for a tributary. And the pro rata local cooperative solution is one that provides for a tributary level flow rather than the broader watershed wide flow that's outlined in the tables of the regulation. So in essence, this pro rata flow for a tributary, this provision, is that the tributary is meeting its share of the broader watershed wide flow. So whether the watershed flow is being met is not as applicable, and in such a case, there would need to be a gauge in order to ensure compliance with the tributary specific flow. So there's a question about who is responsible for determining if the diversion could impact REDS. I think this is related to a couple of the provisions where we have the option for local cooperative solutions as well as for the livestock prohibition provision. And in the case of impacts to REDS, as part of the proposal, the individual requesting coverage under the lifting of the prohibition or a local cooperative solution would need to provide information supporting why there wouldn't be an impact to the REDS. And that could be in coordination with NEMS and CDFW, or it could be a separate information that's provided. And then that would be determined as part of the approval or denial of the request. Do we have any questions from the translation side of things?
We do not have any.
Okay. There's a question about explaining hydrologic monitoring plan for successfully implementing these regulations, including real-time stream flow gauging, QAQC, and whether it would be publicly available. I'm not tracking that question fully, so if anyone wants to provide further clarification on that question, that would be helpful. And then there's a question about, for the BMP option, do we mean 80% of snow water equivalent as opposed to just snowpack? This is for the Scott River, and the short answer is yes. Thank you for flagging, so we can make updates as part of our proposal to the board. Okay, there's a question about the addition to the end of section 875.2. It's the little I. And that's the section on human health and safety. That allows nonprofits and local governments to stand in the shoes of diverters and submit requests for human health and safety exemptions. The question is, what type of organizations might qualify? And so the types of organizations that might qualify are an entity like RCAC, which is a rural community assistance corporation, if I'm getting my acronym correct. That might be an example of one type of entity that might do that. And this is a new provision, so there's a lot of ability to think about who those organizations might be. And if people have thoughts about who those organizations might be, and they want to talk about that further or propose different entities, that would be we'd be interested in getting those types of comments. And then how that process would work, we would be looking to have those organizations work with the community directly. And the board to fill out the appropriate information. There's a question about the minimum requirements that should be in place for coordinating entities. Coordinating entities are defined in the regulation, and it's entities that would have experience being able to verify the actions that are being proposed and taken and implemented, and evaluating and recommending those local cooperative solutions to the board. So they should have experience with whatever is being proposed as part of the local cooperative solution, and then be willing to sign a binding agreement and follow up with overseeing implementation of that local cooperative solution. There is a question about what information orders are contemplated under section 875.8. And will there be provisions to protect water use proprietary data and privacy? Well, I'm not sure what water use proprietary data we're concerned about. So that might be something we should talk about if folks have specific types of data that they think are proprietary or should be kept private, and why and under what code that type of data is considered private or proprietary. That would be helpful if people want to provide comments to that effect. I'd really appreciate that. In terms of information orders that are contemplated, we've talked a lot about our desire to get better information on groundwater use. So that's one area where we're interested in groundwater levels and groundwater use. I'm not saying that we will issue information orders. Obviously, the board hasn't even adopted this regulation at this point in time, but we have forecast that is an area that we are very interested in. We're also interested in just understanding surface water rights, I think a little bit more in the Shasta as well. Sorry, I'm scrolling as fast as I can. So there's a question about on page 8, the little I. This is about watershed wide flows and tributary specific pro rata flows that are and it says there's new language. It says where the diverter or coordinating entity submits a petition under the subdivision. this provision is to allow people to curtail voluntarily rather than getting a curtailment order. So we did have this individual provision previously. We did move some stuff around. And this was developed prior to adoption of the first round of the regulations. But we have not seen anybody take advantage of this. This is actually someone just stepping forward and saying, I'm going to curtail. And you don't need to send me something. I will not take water when those flows aren't being met. And then there's a question or a request for clarification on a statement in the regulation that says the diversion is necessary to further the constitutional policy that the water resources of the state be put to beneficial use to the full extent they are capable, and that waste and unreasonable use be prevented, notwithstanding the effect of the diversions on more senior water rights or in-stream beneficial uses. In this case, this section establishes that the minimum diversions for human health and safety are reasonable, even where there's not sufficient water for the more senior rights or in-stream flows. And again, this is unchanged from the prior version of the regulation. And then there's on page 29, item 4, there's a request for clarification. The language that's cited there is this type of local cooperative solution can result in benefits that make the less efficient diversion reasonable, such as providing for more economic livestock watering, reducing ditch drying and associated repair needs, and potentially allowing for difficult to quantify or otherwise uncertain groundwater recharge, with associated support for other beneficial uses during high flow events, with assurances that such diversions will not result in curtailments or unreasonably inhibit adult or juvenile salmon migration, incubation, or rearing. So the purpose of this statement is to discuss some of the benefits that can result from inefficient livestock watering being reasonable under certain circumstances, like the high flows event. And in this case, I want to say we put out this preliminary draft regulation as a standalone type of document. So folks may not have been able to understand certain provisions. And so in some cases, we did add additional text we thought was complementary to folks understanding where the idea came from or why it was put forward. So there's a question about if the LCSs are fully subscribed, and I'm assuming that means like folks are implementing the local cooperative solutions and the minimum flows are not being met, what happens? So I'll provide an example. In the Scott River in the summer of 2022, we had over 90% of the overlying groundwater irrigated acres enrolled in the groundwater local cooperative solution to reduce use by 30%. And we did not meet the minimum in-stream flows that year. In that instance, the board did not take any additional action other than it did pursue enforcement actions against folks that were not enrolled in the groundwater local cooperative solution. And that continued, that we felt we could pursue enforcement actions against. There is a provision of the regulation that did provide for the board to take an additional action if it chose to do so. In this instance, the board chose not to take additional action. Okay, I'm trying to see if there's anything else. Oh, I see a question here. In your permit process for section 875.2, which is the section related to I think human health and safety, but I'm confirming, yeah, minimum human health and safety needs. Will there be a requirement for California Public Health and Safety certified site and carrier? So at this point in time, we don't have those types of provisions included in that section. So it's not currently proposed. That could be something that can be commented on. So then there's a question about whether meters can be installed on wells by April 1st in order to get local cooperative solutions. There is a provision in the regulation that provides for a time schedule for meter installation if it's needed. We do think that folks that want to take advantage of a local cooperative solution should be pursuing getting meters installed. And the board has funding to support installation of meters for those that want to come forward and take advantage of that in the nearer term. It's not unlimited funding, so we'll be working with those folks that want to come forward. And if folks have comments about that, please comment on it as part of your feedback on the regulation. Along with any background information and support or proposed modifications that you think would be appropriate. There's a question about evidence supporting the percentages in the graduated cessation local cooperative solution. And that is a proposal, I think, as Philip mentioned in his presentation. That proposal came from the Farm Bureau as one option. My understanding is that that's been discussed with others in the community at some level. And the idea with that is based upon Harder's model showing that earlier cessation of irrigation improves the conditions in the fall. So we're still working with the Farm Bureau. We wanted to put all the options out on the table as part of the preliminary draft regulation in order to receive feedback from folks about what they thought of the various alternatives. There's a question about well meters for what size capacity. We're talking about well meters for agricultural wells. There's a question about whether CDFW will have to give approval before stock water can be diverted if flows are above 500 CFS, I think in the Scott. The provision is that, well, there are several provisions there. One of the provisions is that the coho migration season, the peak has concluded. So that is something we would look to CDFW and NEMS for information to support. And then there's a question about the no reds being disturbed. I talked about that a little bit before. We'd be looking for information on how the diverter plans to confirm that they're not going to disturb reds, or what practices or actions are being taken or what monitoring is being done to avoid disturbing reds. And then there was a question about where the 500 CFS, how did the 500 CFS get established as an appropriate level relative to the inefficient livestock watering? And the 500 CFS in the Scott, again, came from the work we did last year. So in January of 2023, we thankfully received a lot of precipitation. And those levels were used last year. We had a very high peak flow. I think we went like above 2000 CFS in the Scott. And we didn't see any adverse effects associated when we came back down. And so we felt that it was an appropriate level to be able to say from a high flows event, from a big gulp type of standpoint, that 500 CFS could be supported. There is flexibility in the regulation that allows the deputy director to issue those orders, and that will remain. So that's what allowed us to actually implement it last year, was that flexibility that was in the existing regulation. And for folks that want to look at that order, it was order water rate 2003-003-DWR that was used last year to suspend the livestock prohibition. Okay, anything from the translation services?
We do not have any right now.
Okay,
Aaron, we've had one hand up raised very patiently.
oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No, I think we've been prioritizing the received ones, but we've got a 420 phone number ending in 420. If you would like to speak, I'm going to request that you unmute yourself, and you can press *6 when prompted.
Hello, my name is Richard Marshall. I'm a rancher on a small ranch in Scott Valley. I'm president of Siskiyou County Water Users Association. I have two questions. The first is, in your basewater regulation used in the proposed regulations, you reference Appendix 5D, the Siskiyou County Agricultural Economic Analysis, groundwater thing done by University of California, Merced. And I note that in Item 4.4, limitation of analysis, this report was never prepared to be used in the fashion that you're using to set the baseline rates. Instead, it was intended as an economic analysis of the impact of water and crop production. The second question I have references California Water Code 5900, which adopted the Klamath River Basin Compact, including Schedule B of that compact, which was adopted by the California legislature, and that provided in 2121, AB 2121, that the Siskiyou County Flood Control Water Conservation District was to be given authority over subterranean waters of the county, as well as surface waters that were not included in the actual Klamath project area. So my question is, on those two subjects, how does the water board contend that they have a right to override the local authority, which has gone ahead, and we've done SGMA, we've done a lot of things to try to cooperate with the state here, and the state insists on going ahead and taking control of this single use water basin, which only goes to the Klamath River?
So your
That's
first
my question.
question about the
First
appendix.
question concerns the
Yes, no,
baseline.
thanks, Richard. Your first
Yeah.
question about the appendix. We are using the appendix because we think it is a good option for covering the range of crop types and the amount of irrigation needed for those crops. If folks have another option or better resource they think we should be using, we welcome comments and feedback on that as part of the comment process on the preliminary draft regulation. So please send us other options you think are better and why you think they're better, or if you think that's a good option, why you think what we're doing is better than another option. That will help us refine it if necessary or update it. With respect to your second question, Richard, I think we have a difference of opinion in terms of what our legal authority is and what the compact provides for. And so I'm going to leave that for a different conversation and different venue.
All right. Thank you for answering my questions.
Okay, and I think there is a question that talks about, does the water board support the Forest Service winter water right as it stands in the Scott? I am not going to speak on behalf of the entire water board right now. I will say that the Forest Service right is what it is and it's in the adjudication. And so that's what's out there right now relative to what we need to follow relative to water rates. And then there's a question about the BMP based LCS and what information is used to support that. There is information we have about the benefit and reduced consumptive use from moving from like a MESA system to a LIPA system. And so part of it is that reduction along with better management. And there's evidence and data to support that when you're using soil sensors in the correct way and not applying water when water isn't needed, that also reduces the amount needed as well. Again, these are proposals that were put forward by the Farm Bureau. So if you have thoughts about the dates or the LCSs and the components themselves, please provide us with feedback on those. Why you think they're appropriate, what you think is not appropriate, and if you have an alternative proposal, what that might look like.
Great. I think at this point in the afternoon, early evening, Shahab, I'll ask you to flip to the next slide. And we can begin taking just broad public comments. For today's purposes, we're going to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. If you wish to make additional comments, we will take those after everyone has had a first chance to comment. To do so, again, we'll ask you to use the raise hand function on Zoom. That'll put you in the speaker queue and we'll call you turn by turn. When it is your turn, the facilitator will call out your name and invite you to unmute yourself. Again, if you're on the Zoom by telephone, you'll use *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself once prompted. If there's additional questions that have come in that you did not receive a response to, you can continue putting those in the chat and we will hopefully get you a response separately, or we can certainly entertain comments and questions in writing, again, at our email address, scott.shastadrought@waterboards.ca.gov. Before we start calling on the raised hands, I will ask if there is any elected officials or tribal representatives on the call that would like to make a comment to begin. Maybe put a message in the chat for us and we can put you at the front of the line just to respect everybody's time. But if not, I will begin. I see the first hand I've got on my list is Ginger. I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Ginger Sabito. I live in Shasta Valley. The general theme that I see of the draft emergency regulations for both the Scott and the Shasta Basin still lacks the means for protecting the resource against unreasonable and abusive waste. It still has a weak guidelines and standards for enforcement of violators. Rules and regulations were ignored in the previous emergency permittees process, allowing loopholes to be extorted by criminal activities. Every permittee must maintain a robust accounting record, which leaves no doubt to the intended use of the water. The extraction point, destination, logbooks, receipts, quantity necessary for adequate use, and the proper health certification. I asked the question about the public health, and the reason I did is because EON 722 on item number 7 states that nothing in this particular paragraph limits any public health and safety requirements to ensure the safety of hauled water. Circumventing this rule is a public health risk, places us all at risk, and it's required by the state and the EPA, and that the site is certified, bacterial tested, approved for extraction and hauling. Another reason is that circumventing the rules for the logbook documentation and receipts requirement is denying our county and the state sales revenue under the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration 557.04, which is revenue that this county needs to pave our weight damaged roads that have clearly ignored and violated the state and use tax regulations. This is a lack of enforcement. This lack of enforcement and bias enforcement behavior observed in the handling of complaints enforced by the water board. Complaints and notice of violation orders were delayed by months, not days. Required responses ignored by violators, and the lack of enforcement to deter any or punish any violators within a rule-based society. Lastly, on October 30th, series of 3 listening meetings were conducted for the general public, but only 2 were notified to the public. We were denied 1. That's a clear violation of the Brown Act. We're losing trust in your agency. We believe the agency needs to be an advisory, not a regulatory. We believe Siskiyou County has the stewardship that's necessary to protect the resources of this county. Thank you.
Next, we've got Nick Jocelyn. I'll invite you to unmute in just a moment. That is the last hand I've got up now. I've got probably substantial more people on the call. If there are others, please do raise your hand. Nick, give me just 1 second while I look to unmute you, but yeah.
Hi, this is Nick Jocelyn. I had further clarification on the coordinating entities for LCSs. I was hoping that there could be a better defined set of skills and experience that the coordinating entities should possess, so that validation of the outlines in a submitted LCS could be better trusted by everyone, and that the public could comment on the nature of the conditions you might want of those coordinating entities to operate under. I think if the entities or people that were operating as coordinating entities weren't also being audited somehow by someone from the water board. I think it raises concern for whether or not those entities are remaining unbiased in their activities. Thank you.
Hey, Philip,
Yes.
sorry to interrupt here. This is Eric Ekdahl with the State Water Board. I just wanted to jump in and quickly respond to the issue about the Brown Act violation that Ms. Smito raised. I want to reiterate here that the meeting with the community that we had was absolutely not a violation of the Brown Act in any way, shape, or form. Staff have meetings all the time that aren't publicly noticed. It's a question of when we get a lot of board members there that we need to have certain due processes in place and publicly notice those meetings. But we have to be able to have meetings with groups and individuals that aren't publicly noticed. And there's no violation of any kind of due process or statute or public notice requirements in the meetings that we had. I want to reiterate that just so we can dispel the kind of concern or issue before it becomes broader than it actually is. And we're happy to talk through kind of what that means and how we came to that determination, but I want to jump back in and lay that out now. And that's all. Turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. We've got Dave Webb, and then after that, we've got Ryan Walker. Dave.
Thank you. I'd like to point out a couple of things. Given the excessive amount of water demand for the Shasta River, we see essentially in every year 80 to 90% of the natural flows removed at some point in time. And this leads me to the question, the adequacy of the minimum flow target that you're proposing to carry forwards on page 4 of the draft orders for this, the 4th year in which they'll be used, where you're calling for 50 cubic feet per second through the summer. In its recommendation to the State Water Board in 2021, which is where this table came from, the Department of Fish and Wildlife stated, in referring to those numbers, nor should they be construed to provide adequate protections for salmonids over extended periods of time. It seems to me that 4 years is now reaching the extended periods of time, and that we have to acknowledge that 50 CFS was a number deliberately selected by the Department of Fish and Wildlife in order to minimize impacts, but not to be fully protective of fish. In his evaluation of Mr. Podleck's proposal, 30 CFS, Eli Scott also noted from McBain and Trush that in their estimation, at approximately 70 cubic feet per second, water temperatures appeared to level off. I'd like to request that we increase those summer flows from 50 to 70 to be actually protective of the aquatic resources that are there in the river that would be and should be healthy and present if we were not removing such a large percentage of natural flow. Beyond that, I really welcome your inclusion of the provision for public comment in LCSs, but find the language as used to allow maybe a week and maybe not wholly inadequate. LCSs may be presented to the public more than one at a time. They may be complicated, they may be difficult. If we are going to have the opportunity to assess them and to gather up reasonable, pertinent, accurate, and detailed information with which to comment, we need more than maybe a week and maybe after the fact time. We really need at least 2 weeks and probably a month if we're going to see multiple LCSs in front of us at once. So please revise that language, give us more time to do a proper job of participating in this process, as was clearly indicated as being necessary from the 2002 LCSs you had. And I'll stop there. We have more comments. We will send it in writing to me. And thank you for this workshop.
Thank you. As a reminder to everyone, if you do have additional comments, Scott Shasta Drought at waterboards.ca.gov. And then for those that are on the phone call, on the Zoom via your cell phones or landlines, *6 is the command to raise your hand. Once invited to unmute, or sorry, *9 is to raise your hand. *6 is to unmute when invited. We've got Ryan Walker is the next one in line to speak. Ryan, I'll be inviting you to unmute yourself now.
Thank you. Ryan Walker, Siskiyou County Farm Bureau. We'll be submitting more detailed written comments. I had a few just minor points. One is related to the 30% LCS base year maximum number. I think we can understand the need for a maximum number, but I believe the UC Merced 23.5 inches number is not a number that reflects reality as we understand it, and would result in a water number that no one would commit to. I mean, so if the goal is to get people to work with LCSs, I just can't see, and you can see it from your own base numbers from the last round, no one's going to take advantage of that 30% LCS unless we have a broader sense. For most people, that would mean a 50% cut. It just won't happen. So I welcome a conversation about those numbers, but I don't think those UC Merced numbers reflect reality on the ground and or crop needs under UC Davis crop coefficients. The second thing I wanted to point out is that and this again goes to 30% LCS, no provision for water year type. And it's just, again, unrealistic that if we have a really good water year, anyone's going to take the risk with a 30% cut. And it just seems like if we have a good year, that 30% should be something different, like 15%. And 30% was what was needed for extreme drought under the original drought regulations. Now that the drought regulations are for non-drought years, 30% seems a little aggressive and probably should be pegged to water year type. One real quick note on proprietary data that was brought up earlier. Most businesses would view their inputs as proprietary and not want them out there, especially in this world of litigation under ESA. We really feel like all information can be used against us. We'd want some protection if the water board is going to go on a fishing expedition for our data. And then finally, canyon flows in the Shasta. I'm going to bring this up again. No data in the world shows that 70 would get those water temperatures not to be lethal in July and August. And I don't see why we're requiring very painful 50 CSF water flows in the canyon at a time when no fish can survive in the canyon Shasta. The podluck flow strategy seems completely reasonable and well balanced, given that there's just no fish in the canyon. And I'll just keep bringing that up. I don't know what else we can provide, but it's a very frustrating number. But thank you for this opportunity, and we'll be providing more detailed written comments, as I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. That is the last hand I've got up. Here's one. Alexandra, I'll invite you to unmute.
Great. Hi. Yeah. Alex Beering, California Farm Bureau. And I know this is a very technically focused meeting, but I just wanted to support what Ryan Walker had said, as well as I wanted to note that, I know there's a lot of concern about potential for the use of meters and metering. And I know this is something that a lot of folks throughout California have dealt with. There are real reasons that people can feel uncomfortable with the metering of either their diversions or the request to provide information about their water use. I think everyone wants transparency and everyone wants more data and better data. But I just hope people acknowledge and understand that there does seem to be, for many folks, a feeling of concern or a threat when publicly available data can be used by folks who are not necessarily involved in all the collaborative solutions that many of y'all on the phone are involved in today, as well as folks at the Water Board, NGOs, and the farmers and ranchers in the Siskiyou County community. So anyway, just wanted to put that plug in and say that I also appreciate, and I know everyone appreciates, the extent to which board members and staff have been available and willing to be collaborative and engage with everyone up there. You know, it sometimes is disconnected from a lot of the rest of California and California water, but it is no less important. And I know the attention that people have given to this particular issue is, at least in my mind, a good omen for the potential for a long-term management plan. So anyway, thank you again for having this today.
Next hand we've got is Theodora Johnson.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was wanting to talk about the inefficient livestock watering provisions that are still included, which is disappointing in itself. And it appears as though it's gotten harder than it was even under the last iteration of this E-reg to use our stock water, and for that matter to do managed aquifer recharge. So I think we should get to the bottom of, I'm not real satisfied with the reasoning behind the 500 CFS as the number that allows us to begin considering doing stock watering. And then there's this added language requiring it's a little vague as to whether we need, what kind of approval we need to make sure that we're not disturbing reds, and what kind of monitoring we're supposed to be doing when we are finally allowed to divert. So I think it just made it harder yet to do the right thing, which is to take water and spread it out across the landscape when we have it in abundance. And I just hope that we can crank that back down to something that's more reasonable. There's a lot of other issues with this E-reg, but I guess we'll address those with the written comments.
Yeah, I'll ask maybe Aaron to hop on for just a moment. I don't think it's our intent to have made the stock watering more difficult. I think if anything, we're putting standards to the flexibility we had last year while maintaining flexibility. But Aaron, I'll let you chime in.
You're correct, Philip. We're actually just putting in place the big gulp high flows provision that we made use of last year, so that it's easier to be able to directly lift the prohibition when those conditions are met. And then we've added a new option for local cooperative solutions at the tributary scale to lift it, in addition to having the one that was in the regulation last year that relied wholly on CDFW. So there's more flexibility, and we've made changes to make it easier for the prohibition to be lifted with these modifications. And if we need to walk through that at a later time, we can set up a meeting to do that, to talk about it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next hand we've got is Elf Admin.
Hi everyone, this is Nat Kane with Environmental Law Foundation. First of all, I just want to say I really appreciate staff getting this draft out with a week to comment. I know it's not a required part of the process, and getting a chance to weigh in is really great. I think it's important to recognize that this is not a program that has achieved its goals. 2021, it started late. 2022 was a dry year, and we really didn't get close to the flows. And that was based on that purported 30% reduction. And even this past year was a much better hydrology, but we still dipped below the minimum flows in August and only really came back up when we had some uncharacteristic August rain. So I would like to kind of respond to the idea that these reductions should be lowered, because I don't think they should be. I think we need to keep working on getting towards meeting the CDFW recommended flows that are necessary for the preservation and recovery of these fish species. All that to say, I think that this draft, it includes a lot of creativity. I like some of the ideas behind the new LCS models, but I don't see the evidentiary connection tying management practices and these graduated cessations to actual flows in the river. I haven't seen model runs that justify these schedules and justify these BMPs in terms of expected flows to the river. And we'll be submitting written comments on some of that. And I also do think that monitoring of implementation is really important, because the public needs to be assured that people are doing what they say they're going to do. And I think that's a really important part of this program. And I think it's important not just for the, environmental, public interest, tribal stakeholders here, but also for growers to know that their neighbors are doing the right thing, which I think is a real incentive for everyone to do the right thing. So I think information and sharing information is a really important part of this program. And again, I just want to thank staff for being creative, being available, and working to improve this program, because it's an iterative process and we're in the middle of it. Hopefully it's going to get better, and hopefully we'll have better results, and hopefully we'll get some rain this winter. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. All right. Again, that's the end of our list of hands. Final call for anyone that's on the phone. *9 is to raise your hand. But if we see no one else, maybe in the meantime, as we wrap up, I'll ask Shahab to flip back over to our last slide. We've said it a couple of times, but just to reiterate, comments on the preliminary draft regulation are due Thursday, November 16th at 5 p.m. They can be submitted via email as the preferred option to Scott Shastich route at waterboards.ca.gov. On the screen, you can see mailing addresses for hard copy, either USPS or hand delivery. And I note that hard copies must be received and not postmarked by that November 16th comment period deadline. Before we conclude, I do want to check in with our interpreters and just confirm that we don't have any outstanding comments or questions to receive.
We do not have any.
Thank you. So with that, I think that's our last slide. Do we have one more? If not, we'll be posting this presentation to the board's Scott Shastich Drought Response webpage. I appreciate everyone's time today, participation, and attention. Again, written comments are due by the Thursday, the 16th at 5 p.m. And this concludes today's meeting. Thank you all very much for participating.